Welcome to episode 105 of the Eat for Endurance podcast. My name is Claire Schornstein, and I am a board-certified sports dietitian and runner based in Santa Cruz, California. I'm also the founder and owner of Eat for Endurance, a virtual private nutrition coaching practice. Today, I am so excited to be interviewing sports dietitian Val Schonberg on a number of nutrition topics relating to midlife health for active women. I am currently in Val's Menopause Consult and Journal Club to deepen my own expertise on this topic, and I was really excited to get her on the show to share her wealth of knowledge and experience as a midlife health and nutrition specialist. Val is a certified menopause practitioner with the Menopause Society and helps women rethink their response to aging, avoid harmful restrictions, and discover a lifestyle approach that maximizes their vitality and future. She also specializes in all types of eating disorders and disordered eating. It's been a while since I dedicated an entire episode to peri and postmenopause nutrition, and I've received several requests for more content on this topic. In case you missed it, definitely check out episode 72 with dietitian Dina Griffin. This is a great overview episode on nutrition for peri and postmenopause in female athletes and addresses many common questions and concerns. Val and I cover many different topics today in this 90-minute episode, including protein recommendations for women in midlife, how to differentiate between low energy availability and perimenopause, navigating body image during peri and postmenopause, the pros and cons of weight loss drugs for women, and why restricting carbs is never a good idea, especially in midlife and beyond. I hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, please be sure to follow and subscribe to the show, rate and review the podcast wherever you listen or watch, and share with your friends. All right, that's it for me today. Time to learn from dietitian Val Schonberg. Val, it's so great to have you on the show today. Welcome to the Eat for Endurance podcast. How's everything going for you?
Good. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited for our conversation.
Yeah. So before we start chatting about today's topic, I always like my guests to introduce themselves. So maybe you can give a little bit of background on yourself as a dietitian. And I'm not sure if you're an athlete or what you like to do, but maybe you can give a little background on that as well.
Sure. Well, I'm a registered dietitian. I'm located in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also a board certified specialist in sports dietetics. So I work a lot with athletes of all different levels and abilities. I'm also a certified menopause practitioner. So I spend a lot of time working with women who are in their midlife and older years. And let's see, personally, I have 4 kids who are located all over the country. And I'm originally from Minnesota, so that's a little bit of a background about me. In terms of sport, yes, I would think of myself as more of an endurance athlete historically in terms of what I really enjoy doing. I was a cheerleader when I was in college, and then from there went on to kind of do what we would call teach aerobics. And then I was a personal trainer and fitness instructor before I went and finished my master's degree in nutrition and specialized in that. So I love cycling. I do a lot of hiking. I'm not a big runner. But then kind of starting in my 20s, I really got into weightlifting as well. And that was just because of the environment that I was working in. I was working at a health club, and my friends were bodybuilders, and so I would train with them. And so I have a passion for helping women find joy in resistance training, because it is important, but it also can be really fun. And it used to be this thing that, we dreaded. But back in the day when I got involved in it, it was intentionally to look a certain way. And now my perspective is really, I love cycling because it's fun and enjoyable, and there's just something about it that makes my body feel good. And then I also have fun doing resistance training, not only because it's fun, but I love the benefit of feeling stronger rather than using it to kind of control what my body looks like.
Awesome. Thanks for explaining all of that. All right. So I'm really excited for our chat today, and we, offline, we're just kind of going over, let's see, how's this going to flow? And I'm really excited to see where this topic takes us, because We're chatting about a few different things relating to nutrition in midlife for active women, including protein needs. We're probably going to touch on some body image concerns and how to differentiate between low energy availability and perimenopause. Those are at least our goals or targets. We'll see where we get to. And I just want to acknowledge too, and we were chatting a little bit about this, how, the phrase active women, it's a very broad phrase. Like, what do we even mean by that? And I guess for the sake, and you can maybe see if you agree with this, but for the sake of our discussion, maybe we can define that as recreational athletes ranging from women who are kind of lightly to moderately active. Maybe they're exercising regularly. Maybe it's like the Peloton, or they're going for a run, they're cycling, they're strength training, whatever it is, up to women who are, endurance athletes who are putting in more hours, and maybe they're triathletes or marathoners or whatever they are, competitive but not elite level. And I know there's a distinction between that, and these types of women will have different nutrition needs. So, but maybe that can help us just limit it to that group, which is still a really large group, obviously. But I don't know. Do you think that sounds okay? Would you restrict it further for the sake of our discussion? What do you think?
No, I think we can add clarification if we need to. And I think that's a safe group, because I was even thinking, there's this other upper end as well, which is definitely a much smaller percentage. And I don't know how many of them would be listening, but just to keep in mind that when we're looking at nutrition recommendations, often that come through research, we are looking at those elite competitive athletes who their jobs depend on it. And I do work with a lot of professional athletes. And so there are different nuances to people's goals behind recommendations, whether that's to keep a job as a professional dancer, or to win, or to be in the Olympics. I mean, if you look at the Paris Olympics and all of the women athletes that were 40 and older, was something that I reported on in a presentation I did. I mean, it's pretty significant. And so we're also seeing that population of women who are like, hey, I want to maximize my results and my performance specifically around that. Whereas, say, even our recreational competitive athletes who maybe aren't at this elite level, maybe are still concerned about some body composition and weight-related concerns. Not that the others wouldn't be, but their primary focus is winning.
Yeah, exactly. So we can kind of, bring attention or highlight these kind of distinctions as we go, but I wanted to at least just touch on that because, again, saying active women, it's or even athlete, we use that so broadly, we toss it around, and I definitely call everyone an athlete. So sometimes it can be confusing if we're, as you were saying earlier, we're using too general of terms, right? So I'd like to start with protein. This is everyone's favorite topic, especially as it relates to midlife for women. And of course, protein, just generally speaking, has such this health halo around it. It's been even more popularized in recent years as, the most important macronutrient that women need to maximize in the diet during, peri and post menopause. For many different reasons, many books out there, many people, just protein is just being thrown around constantly. And of course it's important, right? We're not going to sit here and say protein isn't important, that there are, of course, times where we have to make sure we're increasing our needs to meet our needs, all of that. But at a certain point, if it's crowding out other macronutrients like carbs, for instance, that are so important for health and performance, it's really counterproductive. And it's not just women, by the way. I literally just yesterday had a client, a male client, who was telling me he ate a 8-ounce chicken breast with hot sauce on it for dinner or lunch or whatever it was. And he had no room for anything else. That's all he had room. He was full. That was it. And it's case in point, that is not a balanced meal. We can't be, just eating 8 ounces of chicken breast, obviously. So I'd love for us to kind of explore the protein guidelines, the research that's out there, why people are so obsessed with protein, and really the nuance that's required when looking at protein needs.
Right. Well, where should we begin on that one?
I know, right?
That's the big thing. Because there's so much to it. And I think that it bears to say that there is a lively debate around protein recommendations in general, right, across the board. And I think some of this is really evolving from, say, research that is saying, is the protein needs based on muscle protein synthesis? So we're trying to gain muscle. Is it trying to protect what we have and, attenuate muscle protein breakdown, which is a big part of it? And then even with that in mind, when we're trying to give recommendations, we have to think about, well, not only the dose of protein in a time period, say like 24 hours, but the dose per meal potentially. And there's arguments a little bit about, does that even matter? And then add into it the type of protein, right? So we can't really compare a study that just looks at whey and casein protein to soy protein to complete vegan protein diet. So there's so much of that nuance that then I think complicates it. Then you have the individual and what is their, lean tissue profile? What else are they eating? Because except for the example you just gave, ideally, we don't eat protein in isolation. Ideally, we eat protein with carbohydrates and fiber and fat and other nutrients. And so I think this is where things get complicated because people want like this really perfect, correct, right, simple answer. Like just tell me exactly how many grams of protein I need to eat. And we can give some of that based on some research, but then it may or may not fit in with their food preferences and their eating pattern and other stuff that's going on. So that's, I think, what makes it really complicated to just simplify the discussion.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think where there's some confusion, perhaps, and we were discussing this in Journal Club, right? Where you were saying, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you were saying that, as we age, and this is more for sedentary people, that we don't actually have to go too far above the RDA for protein for, was it muscle protein synthesis? Am I getting that right?
Right. So if you're thinking about, historically, when we look at protein recommendations for the general public, right, we have the RDA, we have the recommended data we announced, and that is based on maintaining nitrogen balance. So that muscle protein breakdown equals muscle protein synthesis. And so this 0.8 grams per kilogram per day recommendation, that has been around for a while. And what we've learned in let's say the past 2 or 3 decades is, hold on, that doesn't necessarily work for this aging population because we are potentially breaking down more lean tissue and there's even more of an anabolic resistance to building. So we need a better anabolic stimulus to keep that nitrogen balance. So then when you look at general recommendations for, say, just the general public in aging, and we all move to some extent. We have to also define sedentary. Like we're not just potatoes. We're steps. We're walking around. We're going places. So sedentary is still doing some minimal activity. It's just not at a level that you're huffing and puffing, if you want to think of it that way. So with that, then what the recommendations, but it hasn't been put out in specific guidelines yet, is at least 1.0. So from 0.8, we are bumping it up to 1 gram per kilogram per day to maintain muscle. That is, what kind of the expert consensus organizations have been. And that is, again, with just light, normal activity. So then once we start to bring activity into, so intentional activity, so where we are doing more endurance related activity or we're adding in resistance activity. Now that's a whole nother level of discussion of, okay, well, how much? And then it's still different between a 30-year-old or a 25-year-old woman and a 25-year-old man. And a lot of these studies are on 25-year-old young active men. So does that even translate for women and, who are in their regular menstrual cycle? Then take it to a perimenopausal woman who has major fluctuations in hormones, and then to a postmenopausal woman and some of the things that come where we have a little bit of a perfect storm of aging with the changes in hormone profile. And so that's, again, where we have to think about who's our audience, who are we trying to give the message to. So at a bare minimum, what we should be saying, no different than, say, calcium recommendations, right? Calcium recommendations change at age 50.
Yeah.
No longer is it 1,000 milligrams, it's 1,200 milligrams per day. And so that's what we probably need to see, is that then we would be bumping it up to 1.0 gram per kilogram per day for all aging adults. And then on top of that, depending on, even in that profile, like if someone has an acute illness or an injury or some other issues, then even then we would recommend a higher protein recommendation, say as high as 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram per day, depending on those scenarios. So that's where I see kind of these conflicting recommendations, and people might even get confused by my recommendations, because I see people across the gamut. I see athletes of all abilities, and I see women who just kind of do their 5,000 steps a day kind of a thing.
Yes, totally. And I think that this is where some of the confusion came up. And I even had a very experienced sports RD message me with a question to ask you. And this is what prompted this whole protein thing, because it also was a question I had where I'm like, I'm never recommending 1 gram per kilogram to people. And the guidelines that I've seen, it's like, especially for endurance athletes, maybe we're starting at 1.6 grams per kilogram, depending on how active and your training volume, and, kind of looking at people who are really putting in a lot of hours, ultra runners, et cetera. And we're going up much further than that potentially. Maybe someone who's more moderately active, not necessarily training for event, maybe they're still at like 1.2 to 1.4 or somewhere in there. So it's and then, as you said, it's taking individual considerations into account, like, and also, hey, let's make sure we're meeting their carb needs. Like, let's make sure that there's room for all the things. But I think that's where some of the confusion is coming, is for the active population, figuring out, well, okay, what do we know? Because there's all this conflicting stuff. And as you said, complications. What do we actually know with protein recommendations in these different life phases for women and how they change? So like when someone is active and they are entering perimenopause and then into postmenopause and they are still active, are there things that should be changing? Do protein recommendations change for that group?
There's certainly for when someone's more active, like let's say, and
yes,
you can define it further, of say you're doing endurance activity upwards of 250 minutes a week. I like to use 150 minutes a week is a pretty standard recommendation for the general public, right? So you're getting into that 60 to 90 minutes multiple times a week of pretty moderate to high intensity, 50 to almost 70% or more of your maximal heart rate, right? Like, so that level of activity, you're out of breath kind of thing. Then absolutely, I think that I would say that I would land on the recommendations that I've seen in position papers that are 1.3 to 1.6 grams per kilogram per day, right? And so again, that's going to depend on a lot of other factors for that individual. I also think we have to consider, has anyone really, declared, how do we disperse that in the day? Right. So if you look at some of the research has suggested above a certain threshold, are we able to really utilize all of that protein? So let's say we're going to do 30 grams of protein 4 times in the day. So that's 120 grams of protein. And let's say it's a 150-pound individual, and someone told them, no, you need to be doing 1 gram per pound, or that 2.2 grams per kilogram, which I think is more frequently being thrown around.
Yes.
So then, okay, so frankly, it's probably not that big of a difference between 120 and 150 grams of protein in a day. But that's where then we start to get into, I think some of that isn't necessarily, I don't think there's a nail in the coffin on some of those recommendations. So do we need more than 1? Absolutely. Do we need more than 1.2 grams per kilogram? Probably. Is 1.3 too low? I mean, I think you can find studies that will show different, it depends on what they're studying. What kind of protein did they use? Were these, athletically trained individuals, or a lot of the research is related to weight loss in people in larger bodies. And so you have to look at, well, who were they testing? Who were they studying? What kind of protein intervention did they do? I mean, recently I read one where it was, saying 35 to 45 grams of protein is going to be more superior. And then I went and read the study, and they were using NHANES data, a food frequency questionnaire,
Yeah.
and some like knee extensor exercise that they had happened to measure in this population and then made this determination. And when you look at the data, the people that were having these higher amounts of protein also happen to be in higher body sizes, higher BMI. They were also eating more carbohydrates and more fat. And so, this is what happens is we get this like these sound bites or this clickbait on some of these. And I'm not saying that it's not correct, but I do think we need to drill down into where did that recommendation come from? And is it being supported by other labs all around the world so that we can, give that recommendation to women? And just like you had said up at the beginning, I think the reason why I have a little bit of a cautious conservative approach to it is because I'm looking at the body as a whole. And we say this for all of our athletes that yes, we want to help you have the most fun doing your sport and improve your performance and hydration and eating well and not getting injured. Like those are all important factors. But I also care about your bone health, your cardiovascular health, your brain health, all of those other pieces. And so I don't like to look at a single macronutrient approach to anything. So then it has to come with what kind of protein do you like to eat? Like, are you a vegetarian? Are you a vegan? Do you have a very hungry brain? Like if someone's going to serve you 40 grams of protein at a meal, like, are you able to eat all the fiber you need in the day too? And I think fatty acids are super important too. So, and then how are we thinking about our meals? Are we thinking about our meals as just a chicken breast? Or are we thinking about our meals as like a bowl of chili with, some cornbread? And because that meal can definitely provide 30 grams of protein too. So I think that's where my conservative approach comes in, is that when we focus on a single nutrient, we lose sight of the entire picture of nourishing this person, not only for sport and performance, but their overall health and well-being. And then overthinking is just generally a problem.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Where do you think this whole 1 gram of protein per pound thing that everyone is like hanging on to now, where did that come from and why is it so popular?
I don't know. I think that there's some influencers maybe that are, sharing that kind of information, but I always try to drill it down to where's the research study. And I think there are some papers out there that are really looking at these higher doses and getting a response. I know there was a study recently. Now this was in younger, I don't remember if they were endurance trained or resistance trained women. So I think they were an average age of like 26. And they did an intervention where it was 30 grams of protein per meal or 60 grams of protein per meal, I believe. And there wasn't a benefit to the higher amount, for example. But they did show that, and there might have been a lower control group, right? But there was a benefit to 30, and there was an equal benefit to 60, but 60 didn't provide a more benefit. But the question that needs to be asked is, well, then is 45 just as good, or do we get the same, so it's kind of, this is where some of the nuance comes in. And these studies are super expensive for them to do. And they're generally a really small sample size because they're hard to do. So we're not looking at thousands of individuals. We're looking at 25 people maybe. And then are they well trained, or are they new and haven't done, and they're sedentary coming into doing exercise? And so I think those become pieces. But yeah, I think that they're really trying to figure out where are we getting, first of all, we talked about the minimal, right? So that's that 1.0.
Yeah.
Like, okay, this is this minimal. Now, where do we optimize? And then we want to optimize, but not to a point of excess. And so I think that's where the studies are kind of all over the place in terms of what they're testing, because they can only measure so much in one particular study.
Yeah, I think protein is really stressing people out. And I don't know if you've seen all those memes where they're like, eating protein is like my part-time job or something like that, the things going on where people are just so focused on getting it in. And that certainly isn't our goal, right? To stress people out with these nutrition recommendations.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind when someone is starting to feel that stress, so if they're listening to this and they're like, y'all aren't helping, like you're talking all over the place.
Yeah.
I still want to know. I would say, here's the deal. Are you skipping meals? Because even if you're skipping meals, you're probably going to be falling short. Are you trying to restrict certain types of protein? So maybe you're a selective eater and you don't like certain foods, or you are trying to omit all animal protein for whatever reason. And that's neither right or wrong. But those might be factors that then for that person, yeah, we might see potentially an inadequacy in protein intake, especially with these higher needs. So then if you looked at your own eating pattern and you're like, oh yeah, that's me. Like I've been doing that intermittent fasting. And so I don't eat until 12 p.m. And then I kind of have a salad with some chicken on it. And then I catch up on my eating later in the day. Well, probably the intervention needs to be restoring or reclaiming breakfast. And then when you get breakfast on board, make sure that there's a protein there. So let's say that, you're not super hungry in the morning because you've taught your body not to be hungry in the morning. Well, then we might have to start with something that is palatable and tolerable. And what would that look like? And so maybe we are just starting at 20 grams of protein. And then because that's pretty easy. You can have a Greek yogurt with some almonds and get 20 grams of protein. But then maybe we can expand that meal so that it's more sufficient if lunch and dinner, for example, are a little bit better. And then the other part of that might be, let's say we're going to throw in a fourth eating event to make sure we're getting closer to those goals we were talking about. Well, then what are you doing in terms of your recovery snack? Do you have an adequate protein? Or are you having a piece of string cheese and some crackers? And so then we can focus on, well, let's give you some good ideas so that we're getting closer, say, to 20 or 25 grams of protein at that, third or fourth eating event, or I should say fourth eating event. And then who knows, maybe you have a snack before you go to bed. And maybe that's where you have a nice Greek yogurt, or that's where you put in your protein smoothie. Because that's the other problem that I see is with some of these like higher recommendations is women are like, oh my gosh, I cannot get this from food. And so then what they're doing is they're using protein powders, which aren't a bad thing. It's just that that's not the same as food. Like that, you are not getting zinc and, all the other, iron and some of the other vitamins and minerals that we get from eating real food. So if you're heavily leaning on these protein powders and supplements to meet those higher protein needs, I would say it's a good opportunity to reevaluate what's happening at your meals, because it really doesn't need to be that hard to get, 100 grams of protein in a day. And most people are probably going to need a little bit more than that. So we just have to level up some of those meals.
Yeah, I love how you just laid all that out. And I think that's actually, I was going to say this for a little bit later, but I think this is such a great segue into our discussion about low energy availability and differentiating that from perimenopause and just how this all fits in. Because basically the picture you just painted was someone who is not eating enough. So they are most likely in a state of low energy availability, because if someone's active and they're not eating breakfast and they're not eating consistently, we know they're not getting enough into their body. And a lot of people are, whether it's from social media or a book they read or whatever, and it's being pounded into their head, eat more protein, you have to eat more protein to keep your lean body mass and to lose weight and this and that. And so maybe they're going from a place of like skipping meals or doing this and that, and then just like adding a bunch of protein, but nothing else, and so I think it's interesting in this whole protein conversation to then discuss, okay, well, a lot of these women in this stage of life, like really just aren't eating a lot because many of them are, struggling with their weight, or they've gained weight. And of course, the first thing you do is restrict and, eat less and exercise more and all of that. So maybe, we can jump into that conversation and kind of see where that goes.
Yeah, because that's where the first level of resistance comes in. When I say, let's bring breakfast back on board. And then it's like, I can't afford to eat more calories. It's like, well,
Yeah.
the fact that you're under eating calories is negatively affecting protein metabolism in and of itself. So that's another thing is like, even if you're targeting 150 grams of protein in a day, which to me still seems like a lot, but nevertheless, if you have low energy availability and are restricting your intake, you're really not getting the benefit that you think. And so it's kind of like it's like you're chasing your tail. And so, or it's the picture of the iceberg we need to get underneath that to say, first of all, what are your goals? So if your goals are to improve performance as an athlete, well, then we need to look at the whole picture of how you're nourishing your body. And if then a level underneath that is, but I'm also concerned about my body composition or my body weight, well, under eating isn't necessarily helping that. Like you're kind of fighting with your biology, because if you don't have enough energy on board, you're not going to maximize protein metabolism anyway. You're also potentially, losing muscle mass in that picture. It depends. I hate to throw that out, but that could be a part of what goes on for someone. I mean, we know that in weight loss studies, people lose lean tissue even with these higher amounts of protein. So that is the other thing, is that helping women feel safe with being able to add more food in. How do we do that? It's going to depend on every single person and what's really going on there.
Today's show is brought to you by my virtual private practice, Eat for Endurance. I've been working with a wide range of active people for over a decade now to help them feel their best in their everyday and athletic lives, and I would love the opportunity to help you as well. I offer a ton of free resources on my website. In case you haven't seen them yet, go to eatforendurance.com and check out nutrition resources. I have some low-cost downloads as well there if you prefer learning on your own. I do also offer a monthly one-to-one nutrition coaching program if you need more personalized support. And if you're looking for a more low-cost option to work directly with me and have access to me, my upcoming monthly membership, Fuel for Life Crew, you will hear more about it soon, but that is a really great option as well. In one-to-one coaching, if you are interested in that, we explore your unique history, we assess you as a whole person in the context of your busy life, and we strategize how to achieve realistic, sustainable health and performance goals. I've helped clients overcome low energy, GI issues, nutrient deficiencies, difficult relationships with food and body, poor athletic performance, injury, and so much more. Visit my website, eatforendurance.com, if you're interested in checking out my nutrition resources and to explore the many different ways that we can work together. All right, back to the episode. Let's go a little deeper into the low energy availability perimenopause conversation, because there are a lot of overlapping symptoms. And I think also perimenopause, it's great that it's getting so much airtime these days, but it's now also being blamed for almost everything, when it could just be that a woman in her 40s has a lot going on. And it's really hard and stressful having, younger kids and aging parents and a busy career and all the things, right? So, how do we tease apart what's happening for women in their 40s? And perhaps early 50s.
Yeah, it is tricky, because you are going to have potentially irregular menstrual cycles. You are going to have some sleep disturbances. For me, I feel like I had many years of perimenopause, and one in particular were some early signs of frozen shoulder, which I could go into, but then it really manifested into a full-on frozen shoulder that happened in my later perimenopausal years too. And so could have I eaten different to fix that? Probably not, right? Like some of that is just the natural change that's happening with those hormones. And these hormones are wildly fluctuating, which is partly why we have some of the symptoms. And so one of the things I run into, and I work in a sports medicine clinic, and so I see a lot of women who come in to us because they have some type of an injury related to their sport. And we've seen this more than a few times, which is where we have someone in, say, their early 40s, even late 30s, and they have stubborn weight, they feel like their coach tells them they need to be at a lower weight, and they were there, but now they've gained this weight and they can't seem to lose it. And they, have a pretty high protein intake. They're avoiding carbohydrates like the plague, and, kind of filling up on a bunch of supplements and some of that kind of stuff. And then they have, iron deficiency, but they have a really low heart rate, and that tells them how great and healthy they are. And all of these signs of low energy availability. But they've been told, well, that's perimenopause. So then it gets dismissed, or they go to their gynecologist and say, hey, you need to put me on menopause hormone therapy because I have perimenopause and I need the hormone therapy, because now that's another thing. And then their gynecologist says, no, you don't need hormone therapy. And then they feel dismissed and unheard. And in cases like this where we've seen them, I mean, you can't do a test to check for this because your hormone, and I have my own reality with that. These hormones are all over the place. So it's not super reliable until you have these 12 months of no menstrual period to say whether or not those were those perimenopausal years. But what has happened is when I work with someone and we say, we don't know, it could be perimenopause, but we need to address your symptoms. And your symptoms are that you have a bone stress injury and you're not sleeping well and some of this other stuff. And so we focus on nutritional rehabilitation. We need to fuel for the amount of activity you were trying to do. And now we're fueling for healing, especially bone healing. And in a couple cases where women were really motivated and were like, I just thought having low iron was normal because I'm a runner. And when we get everything back up we treat the nutrient deficiencies, we get people back where they were. In a couple cases, women have started their regular menstrual cycle. And so it was a good sign that was a sign of your 3 months here and there of amenorrhea were really related to relative energy deficiency in sport. And so now it's even better because now we can have a longer time span with those hormones on board, like the endogenous hormones. The hormones your body produces are always going to be better than anything you can take. So, and I'm not against menopause hormone therapy. I don't mean it that way. It's just that that's going to be a better solution. You're going to keep your bones healthy, keep that lean tissue. And so that's where I feel like, how do we assess for low energy availability in perimenopause is you have to address the nutrition inadequacies. And, and the next question I usually get from people is, yeah, but I'm already struggling with my weight. Like in that particular scenario that I said, like, I can't imagine eating more. I'm just going to gain more weight. Well, sometimes what you were doing was living with a suppressed weight. So you think that you need to be 20 pounds less than where maybe your body has battled you back to. But maybe that's where your body wants to be. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that. But that is, I think, one of the other problems that I see is that if someone's even been dieting for years, like going on and off diets, do we really even know what your true weight is? Not really, because it's always been somewhat of a suppressed weight that then your body's catching up or even going over, and then you're losing again. And so we have to stabilize your eating, and that's where we have to learn to trust your body, work with your body, listen to your body, and probably do some body image and body acceptance work in that process, because that's not easy. I don't mean to trivialize that. That is really hard work, especially in the culture that we live in, and especially in the fitness culture where, I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling. I should probably.
No, I love all this. No, this is great. I love it. Keep going. Keep going. I'll more questions for you after. Keep going.
Yeah, and this is the other thing that comes with that is, I don't care about the scale. I don't care about the number on the scale. I just want to be strong. And I'm like, yep, it takes one to know one. Been there, done that. And I think that, yes, that's so true. Like, there is nothing better than feeling strong and being able to bench a certain amount of weight or do all that. That can feel great. Or to ride for a certain distance or to improve your speed. And all of that is great. But I think that what we see in the anti-aging space is, but when you're strong, you look a certain way, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, but I don't see my muscles. I used to be able to look a certain way. My arms looked a certain way. Now that they don't look that way anymore. And so they can feel strong. They know they're lifting heavier and heavier weight, or they're getting stronger on the bike or running, but they don't look, quote unquote, look like it. And that's where we have to call that out a little bit too, because that is definitely not a weight neutral message. That is a diet culture oriented message when we say, oh, I just want to be strong. Yes. And we're going to have to accept that you can be strong and still potentially have a little bit of some softness on your body for reasons we don't entirely understand at this age.
Yeah. And the other one I see is, I don't care about my weight. I just want to fit into my clothes. Like, that's one I just got from a client the other day that I get all the time. And I get that. No one wants to buy new clothes, especially if like the clothes you're talking about are already your like comfy clothes, right? So, but I think that really just points to what you were talking about. And I'm thinking about this particular client who's most definitely been most likely at a suppressed weight for a long time, that, you know, you really normalize like, oh, well, this is where I should be. I've always been here, but under what circumstances, you know, what have you been doing? Like really taking like an honest look at yourself and your dietary habits and all of your behaviors and being like, what have I been doing to keep this body and where has it gotten me? Right. So just because something has been a certain way doesn't mean that's the healthiest place for you. And I think it definitely takes a lot of courage and persistence to explore that and to be open to change. And it's really scary and hard. But I mean, exactly what you were saying. I think the main takeaway is, especially with perimenopause, number one, not just jumping to conclusions like my period is irregular, it's definitely perimenopause. I mean, it might be, but again, what are you doing? Like really just getting back to some foundational things of like, how are you eating? Like, what are the things you're doing? Are you really supporting the activity that you're doing? Are you really eating consistently and taking care of yourself? And if you do those things, do you still have these symptoms? Do you still have irregular periods? Like all that stuff that you mentioned. But most women don't do that, unfortunately. It takes someone stepping in and really pushing them to do it, or for something bad to happen, like an injury or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just really shifting the mindset to tuning into your body. And in a perimenopausal years, I mean, I think I have like 8 or 9 years of tracking in perimenopause, because it was just like, okay, you know, when's it going to end? When's it going to end? And then another thing would happen, and then another thing. And so it can be, you either have to laugh at it. And I know that some people don't like that, but that's been my approach to menopause. And I think part of it is because I do understand a lot about menopause. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not resistant to it. I've had to roll with it a little bit. And that does not mean I haven't suffered greatly. Like I said, the frozen shoulder was a really big deal. Certainly GI stuff has been problematic. Hot sweats or night sweats, sleep problems. It's learning enough so that you continue to nourish your body in a way that makes sense, that is balanced. And then kind of back to your question, okay, but my clothes don't fit anymore. I mean, that's a blow. Like that's a big body image threat. That is really hard, especially because I've had women who are like, the scale hasn't changed, but now I have to buy, new swim, like they're triathletes and they're having to buy new gear and they're like, I am just done. Like I've already bought one new size up. I don't want to buy any more. This has just got to end. When is it going to end? And so that is where I have a ton of compassion and, just, I get it. Like that because you feel it in your body. It's so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So everything, like I just described, is like everything's out of control. It feels so out of your control at a time when life is really out of control. And when we think back to the COVID years, I mean, 2020, 21.
Yeah.
I mean, that was even so hard for women. And, we're coming out of that, but I think some of the residual effects of that are still around. So it's starting with a place of acknowledging, like, yep, this really sucks. I don't like it. We've been brainwashed to believe that our bodies aren't supposed to change. So that is not a true story. If you can look back generations of all active women, and they've changed and they've increased body fat, or they've even increased visceral body fat and still been very healthy people. And I'm not encouraging people to just be unhealthy. I'm just saying, like, some of this does come into the stories that are being told out there are not entirely correct. And that's why we can feel so discontent. So if we move from, I don't like the way my body's changing, but you know what? I guess I'm just going to have to work with my body and maybe get clothes that fit a little bit better. And I get the financial issues with that too. So I want to be sensitive to that. The other thing that we can do is kind of think about what else matters at this stage of life. So, even for athletes, I'm guessing that most people have a life outside of their sport. So it's, what else is it that's important? And so it is an opportunity to reassess how you're caring for your body, how you're moving your body, especially for endurance athletes. If you've been doing the same 5-mile run every single day for the last 10 years, it's time to do something different maybe. And I know people like this. And you don't have to, like, there's nothing wrong with what you're doing, but that could be another opportunity to get a personal trainer and learn some different exercises, but even more importantly, do you want to be able to travel? Are there passions or causes you believe in that you want to refocus on? And so it's putting some of this in its proper place, because if everything about who you are is wrapped up in what your body looks like, you're going to stay stuck for a really long time. And if you can expand that to, yes, that's still something I care about. It's still important, but it's a smaller piece of the pie. And all these other things about who you are, your career, who you are as a friend, a mother, a whatever, that those are other things that you value and define who you are, then that is a part of this kind of identity shift that might have to happen too at this stage of life.
Yeah, I think it's very hard in the society we live in for a million reasons. Doesn't help that, you've talked about this in your journal club, but that everything is so weight centric with in terms of healthcare, and weight loss is kind of the prescribed thing for everyone, for almost everything, for men and women. And yeah, it's just so ingrained in everybody. It's just something that's so hard to let go of, that you're supposed to look a certain way. And I'm curious, because I know you help your clients get to kind of this place of acceptance and peace with their bodies, which doesn't mean you love your body, but maybe you feel a little bit better about the situation and you can move on with your life. And as you were saying, appreciate the many other significant sides of yourself that are so much more interesting and important than weight. But yeah, maybe you can kind of give some examples of how you work with clients to get to that place, or maybe even go through. Actually, I really liked your blog post on the 5 stages of grief and how it kind of applies to women. I thought that was really interesting and helpful. But anything else you kind of want to say about this, because it's just such a common struggle?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I think it's a struggle that we have to name and validate a little bit more. So, for years, and I've been a part of this as well, that, how our body size was really important. And it was about, some of our identity, especially if you've been an athlete. So if you are someone who has been, say, a collegiate level athlete and then went on to even, recreational competitive endurance sports, you probably are still hanging on to some of that athletic identity. And that athletic identity is a bit of what we look like. And so we might have to recognize that. Like, where is the discontent coming from? So the desire to keep your body at a certain size, what is that about? Like, what purpose does that serve? So when someone comes to me and they say, my shape has shifted and I don't like this because I have to go get new clothes. Okay, well, that sucks because no one really wants to have to go buy new clothes. But on the other hand, if that is something that no different than puberty, like our bodies change, or in pregnancy, our bodies change, you had to kind of adapt to that. What if that were more the norm? Like, okay, well, this is what happens, and this is how you adapt to that, and this is how you change. But then even what is the meaning underneath that? So what does that mean if your body's changed? What are you most afraid of? And a lot of times it's afraid of what someone else thinks. Well, someone else is seeing that my body's changed. And so that means I'm not the lean, thin, fit girl anymore. Oh, okay. So that's some of your identity. And so that is really where we have to meet people where at that point and just kind of acknowledge it and say, well, who else are you besides that person? And that's why I wrote The Stages of Grief, because I think there is somewhat a loss of how, most people have certain things about their body that they haven't liked even over the years. They didn't like their legs, or they didn't like their arms, they didn't like their belly, or whatever. But they still had something of, how they felt like they were showing up in the world. And now when that's changing, that's hard. There's a book, it's called, Just When I Started to Feel Comfortable in My Body, It Started to Sag. Or just when I was feeling comfortable in my body, it started to sag. And it's a little bit of that. It's like, I think sometimes by the time we reach our 40s, we cognitively are a lot stronger and confident in who we are. And it's a beautiful time in life. It was for me, and I was going through a lot in my 40s, but I was like coming into this confidence. And then even at age 50, I was probably in the best shape and leanest I'd ever been in my life, not because I was trying, but because of the time or, the effort I was putting into my activity. And so when I'm almost 60, and things are just doing their own thing. Like no matter what I do, things are sagging and changing, and clothes are fitting differently. And so it's kind of, if you can say that this isn't necessarily wrong or bad, and here's who I am besides all of that, it will become a little more tolerable, might be the way to say it. It will be easier to adjust to, oh man, like, I don't like that picture. And I have like 10 strategies on how to deal with pictures. Like, we have to like help people. Like,
Yeah.
What do you do when you get that body image threat? Like, how do we shift that so you don't spiral crazily out of control? That then this is what leads people back to I'm not eating enough protein. I'm eating too many calories. Okay, I'm going to call one more person. I'm going to read one more book. I'm going to go listen to this podcast and that. And that's the spiraling. And then that's when it starts to get this mixed messaging of, well, she said I should only have 1.3 grams per kilogram. And someone else is saying I should have 2.2 grams per kilogram. And now you then have more stress.
Yeah.
The whole thing spiraled because you're uncomfortable in your body. So we work with, why are we uncomfortable in our body? That might be a helpful way. Then let's address your other performance goals, making sure we're not getting injured. Because my hunch is that even at 1.0 grams per kilogram, we're still all going to be able to hike Kilimanjaro when we're 80 if we tried.
Yeah, totally. Love that. Yeah, I think it's, going back to what you're saying about body image, it's what other people think. It's of course what you feel in your own skin. But as I was talking about earlier, it's also messaging from healthcare providers. And I think that's really hard when, a lot of people, like I'll get people I work with who have actual, they have chronic diseases, maybe they have hypertension or they have other things that they're managing. And the doctor always says, okay, lose weight, when, we know it's really like, hey, you actually like, let's just focus on behavior and lifestyle changes. And that's really the focus. But, the messaging is so clearly like, you need to lose weight. And I think it's particularly frustrating, especially for any active person, but then for other providers like myself, when, I get a client working with me and the doctor will talk to an endurance athlete and say, you need to exercise more and eat blah, blah. It's like, really, like, clearly you have no idea who this person is. Like, this person is going for 8-hour bike rides or something, anyways. So I think that's another thing to navigate, where people also feel really lost when, the doctor is telling them to lose weight, and that just like piles on even more that messaging.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah, it's super frustrating. And this is where I guess as a dietitian, what I do for my clients is say, get a release of information, and then I'll call the physician and say, hey, You have this recommendation. Let's see how we can work together to, improve this person's health, because maybe it was something like an elevated cholesterol, or maybe their A1C is slightly increased, and then they got this message that they needed to lose X amount of pounds or something. And so then I can pick up the phone and say, hey, just so you know, this person actually, we've been working on some malnutrition related to low energy availability. This person actually consistently exercises 2 hours a day, because sometimes the doctor doesn't really have the time to ask all those questions. And
Yeah.
Oftentimes when I have the opportunity to do that, it's received really well. Not always. But I do try to give it a good college try, as they would say, because then it becomes an opportunity for me to educate physicians as well, and kind of say, you don't have to worry about this. They're in my hands. I'm helping them. But not everyone is working with a dietitian, nor do they have the resources or want to.
Yeah.
So then you kind of have to advocate for yourself to say, when someone tells you, hey, you need to lose weight because your A1C is, 5.7. What I would come back with is, okay, well, I've been trying for the last 10 years or what would you recommend? I already exercise this many hours a day or minutes per week. I do resistance training, because these are pretty common stories from women. I eat all kinds of fruits and vegetables. I don't drink alcohol. I've already tried to do all that. Like, I don't know what else I can do. So sometimes, and that's hard. Like, I just want to honor the fact that to advocate for yourself when there's this power over you dynamic in a doctor's office. But that might be what we have to do when we're standing up for women as a whole, is to say, you need to take some time to ask some questions about the behaviors. And unfortunately, the downside to some of this is you might get the answer, well, okay, if you're already doing all of that, then maybe we should look at a GLP-1.
Weight loss meds. Okay, this is on my list of things. I'm like, I know we didn't plan to talk about this, but we have to talk about this. So I'm really glad you went there. Okay. Yeah, GLP-1. Okay, we need to talk about that. And especially in this time of life, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because it's so tricky.
It is. It's really tricky. And I'm very sensitive to not stigmatizing or shaming anyone who's chosen to use them. It's a hard decision. And we live in a tough environment. And I believe very strongly in body autonomy, where you get to decide what is best for you and your body. But what I also think is important along those lines is we better be delivering very informed, information, so you can make an informed decision about how to care for your body. If you had cancer and you went to someone and they're like, well, you just need to do a radical mastectomy, and there are 3 other options to managing breast cancer, well, that would really suck that you didn't get to hear what those other options are. And that doesn't happen. You usually get, here's all the ways that we can manage this other diagnosis. So when it comes to weight, though, it's always this like, eat less, exercise more. Okay, well, I'm already doing that. It's not working. Okay, then you just got to take this medication. But shared decision making is still part of medicine. And so I think it's asking a lot of questions and saying, but I really worry about my bone health. Or I really, I've already been trying to make sure that I'm eating enough protein so that I'm not losing lean tissue. And I understand that if I, drastically lose weight, one of the major reasons those medications work is that you eat a lot less. There's a lot of other, mechanisms involved there, but that is one of them. And so, yeah, I think it's tricky. And what I tell people when they come to me and they say that they're considering it, I say, you know what, let's try to get the emotion out of it, because it's a very emotional decision around your weight. And I think that your relationship with your body and weight and food is very intimate. So let's kind of remove the emotion for a second. Let's do a pros and cons list. What would be the pros of this? What would be the cons? And most of the time, people will kind of see that, I don't really want to deal with these cons. I'm 50, 55 years old. Maybe there are some things in behaviors or lifestyle, or maybe you have been not working out for 6 months because of something that happened to a family member or career stress or something. And so maybe we do need to revisit lifestyle a little bit. So I don't think there's a really clear black and white answer to this, but I do think that a lot of people are not educated on the downside of those medications. And even if you do decide, well, like, we still need to nourish your body. Like, we still need to have protein, carbohydrate, fats, vitamins, minerals, plenty of hydration. It still matters. Like, it's not like you magically don't need resources anymore to fuel all your essential body functions, including your immune system.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of my main concerns is when I get very active people who want to be taking these meds, and most of the time they come to me already not eating enough. And so then the concern is, well, how are you going to eat enough while on this medication? And then you add in, some appetite suppression that sometimes happens with long or hard exercise that doesn't help, and just kind of the general struggles of a busy day and trying to meet your nutrition needs. So that's definitely a concern of mine. When you talk about a pros and cons list, what are some frequent things on the cons? Like, can you just, for people who aren't aware, what are some of the downsides of taking these meds, aside from the lower appetite that we just mentioned?
Yeah. So decreased appetite can be one, but I would also add to that let's carry out a little further. So even let's say that without naming medications, let's say you get to the maximum dose. What I've seen with individuals is some of that appetite your body adjusts to that. And so sometimes that appetite comes back a little bit. I mean, I've done a lot of work with people with bariatric surgery. So this is where, in my mind, I just look at it in a similar way. And so even with bariatric surgery, people were hugely successful in the first year or two. And then very slowly, they gain the weight back because of all these nuances, right? So in some cases, the appetite starts to come back. And then the recommendations will be to put you on yet another weight loss medication. And then when that stops working, then you will probably get on yet another weight loss medication. And so that's kind of the plan. And that is, so that's the appetite thing. Then for many people, and I think this is, at least from what I've seen clinically, I don't think studies necessarily back this up, but what I've seen clinically is the people who lose the most weight are the ones who have the more severe nausea, maybe even vomiting, and delayed gastric emptying. And being someone who has a significant history working with individuals with eating disorders, let me tell you that gastroparesis is not just a simple little side effect. Gastroparesis is often irreversible. And gastroparesis is where there is a specific nervous system. It's called the intrinsic nervous system that basically is what the digestive system relies on to move food through from the stomach down through your small intestine into your large intestine. And what happens with gastroparesis or slow gastric motility is that nervous system gets kind of sluggish and it just doesn't work very well. And so food sits around a lot longer. And then that is why you don't feel as hungry, because the food's still kind of in your stomach, sending a signal to your brain like, hey, we got food here. You don't need to feel hungry. And then, but gastroparesis can contribute to other side effects down the road that include small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or SIBO, a lot of complicated digestive problems that then we have to work with as dietitians. And selfishly, I'm like, for that reason, gastroparesis is one of the most difficult things to work with. So the nausea, vomiting, gastroparesis that we can see with that's a con. And we don't know. I haven't had an individual who doesn't have any of those side effects. And some people have them pretty seriously. The other would be the cost. I mean, financially, there is a cost. And so even if insurance pays for it, my understanding, and I don't know if this will be changing, but my understanding is, so when you lose 20% of your weight, because that's what it's indicated for, assuming you're using insurance, or assuming you're getting a legitimate drug and you're not using custom compounding, which is become very problematic and not recommended. But if you are using a legitimate drug from your pharmacy, prescribed by your doctor, what happens is that when you lose the weight, then insurance will say, well, you've lost the weight, so now we don't need to pay for this anymore. And so then you get cut off from insurance, and at the price that they are, a lot of people can't afford it. And then guess what? The weight comes back on. So it can be for that reason that some people stop using it, or it could be you've decided, I don't want to use this medication anymore. And so then people go off of it and have this idea that they're going to maintain this weight that they've lost. And even the research studies show that most people will gain the weight back. And then even if we can say, okay, that's not a bad thing because we're trying to be weight neutral, the shame and the guilt that comes from this process of losing and gaining and losing and gaining, right? Because when you lost weight, a lot of people commented, oh my God, you look great. Oh, that's so good. And then when you gain the weight back, no one says anything. And so this is this vicious cycle that we put people on. And then what happens is people do more maladaptive behaviors to lose the weight again because of their frustration and they want to lose the weight. And then we're just in this pretty much a disordered eating, if not an eating disorder cycle. So another con would be the risk of developing an eating disorder. And I would never, as a clinician, subject an eating disorder on an individual for anything, because it is not just a convenient disease. Eating disorders are serious mental health illnesses that cause loss of life. And so I'm not a big proponent of that. And then another downside, I think, is on bone health. I think bone health, being someone who works in a sports medicine and orthopedic clinic, I see a lot of women before they should be getting diagnosed with osteoporosis because of years of diet and weight cycling and under eating and low energy availability. And some of that, some of it is, a lot of bone health is genetic too. But that is another problem that we have to consider, is it worth it to lose this much weight and then potentially, because once we get diagnosed with osteoporosis, that's not reversible. So that is something that now we have to look at pharmacological interventions for that. And so now we're just piling medication on top of medication, when if we could just work on body acceptance and nourishing our body and moving our body, we probably could avoid a lot of that sequence.
Well, thank you so much for laying that out. I think that was so helpful, especially for anyone who is confused by the whole dialogue on GLP-1 and or who maybe is getting that recommendation just so they're a little bit more informed. And as we've been talking about, so they're able to ask the right questions and really advocate for themselves, because I do think it's being handed out a little bit too liberally. And while there are certainly some appropriate times to take it, and I agree it shouldn't be stigmatized, at the same time, it's really not appropriate for everybody. And it's not just this quick fix thing, much like with bariatric surgery. A lot of people are, I'll just get bariatric surgery, no big deal. Well, I also worked on the clinical side on bariatric floor. And let me tell you, some of the complications I saw post-bariatric surgery were not pretty. So it's really not a decision you should take lightly. It's not just pop a med and then I'll stop it. There are potentially some consequences. And it's not just like, hey, I'll drop some pant sizes and everything will be okay. So yeah, I'm really glad we walked through that.
And if, again, like I feel like if someone is at that decision point, my hope is that you can have safe clinicians that you can bounce this around with. And
yes, so, totally.
That's one of the things is when I say that I'm a weight neutral dietitian, which I, believe to my core, I live it out, personally and with all my clients. At the same time, that doesn't mean that people aren't still wanting to lose weight. So, it doesn't magically go away that we just don't want to lose weight anymore when we do that. It kind of cycles around. So ideally, you can have someone that you can have this conversation and we can walk beside each other and dialogue. So you can do a good risk assessment. And in that, you might say, you know what, I do want to try this. Okay, well then let's see how this goes. So then that's the role that I try to help people to is, okay, I'm I'm not judging anyone. But I do still care about your bone health and your cardiovascular health and your lean tissue and all those things. And so my job still is going to see how can we still help you manage maybe appetite concerns, and, nourish your body, and we'll learn some things together. And so I think we're in a tricky time in culture. The other thing I would say about the weight loss drugs too, just one more final point on that, is some people think this is this new thing. Weight loss drugs have been around since the 1940s, if not even before then. And in fact, they were called rainbow pills. You can look them up. And if you look up the history of rainbow pills, what happened between 1942 when they came out to 1968, so they were FDA approved. They were sold by the millions by doctors because, again, obesity was not a personal thing. It was an endocrinological thing. That's what they were saying then, just like we're saying now. And then in 1968, after enough deaths had happened and a big time expose happened, the Congress got involved to say, no, we can't do these anymore. Then you can go to another drug and another drug. So typically, these weight loss drugs have about a 15 to 20 year time span before the FDA approves them. And then we decide like, oh, wait, maybe the cost isn't worth it. And so that's another, I guess, part of my education for people is to say, yes, these drugs are different, but we still don't know a lot, and even when they say, well, they've been in research for 20 years, not at the dose of the ones that are contributing to weight loss. That is more new.
Do you have any opinions on I know some people are put on a very low dose of these meds, and I don't know if you have opinions on that versus like some of the higher doses. And sometimes it's, again, to manage a health complication. I had a client recently diagnosed with fatty liver. Oh, we'll just put you on a low dose of this med, along with some other advice that was really ridiculous. But that's not the point. But yeah, I don't know if you have any opinions on that.
Well, I would say first and foremost for diabetes, that is a completely different discussion. They really, really are, when you look at the dosing, and that's where we have, 2 decades worth of research related to the dosing and the medications in terms of diabetes management. So absolutely, that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the higher doses of semaglutide and, the other combination drugs. And more are going to be coming because they're referred to as niche therapies. There's more of these drugs that are going to be coming down the pike. But yeah, I don't know. Again, I think it's a collaborative workup. So if, let's say, a physician thought, and I've had this happen, where I did have someone with fatty liver and the drugs were being recommended. In that particular scenario, this person had an eating disorder, binge eating disorder specifically. And so that was where I felt it was a little contraindicated because of the eating disorder hadn't really been resolved. I think it's tricky because some people will say, no, it's super helpful for binge eating disorder because it does quiet the noise in the mind, some of that. And so I think that really has to be an individualized conversation between the physician and the entire treatment team. But yeah, I don't think that's that uncommon of a thing that I'm seeing right now. And it's certainly, starting to come out as a recommendation for cardiovascular health as well. So every single time we just have to do an individual risk assessment. What does this mean for you? Are there any other options that we could explore in terms of managing your health concerns, and then go from there?
Yeah. And I know we're almost out of time, but the one last thing I wanted to touch on, and, I know this is potentially a bigger topic, but talking about how carbs fit into the piece of the puzzle, because just circling back to our whole discussion on protein and how a lot of women who are over consuming protein are doing so at the cost of carbohydrate. And there's even advice out there for women to not only eat a lot of protein and potentially far more protein than they need, but also to heavily restrict carbs. And we know that already in our society, carbs have such a bad reputation. People are already fearful and avoiding them. So certainly anyone who's going to kind of like just give that one little final push to reason to avoid carbs, people are like, oh yes, of course I'll avoid carbs. So just kind of curious your thoughts there. And again, in the context of women who are active.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's unfortunate that we have such bad information about carbs out in the public, right? Like it's such a fad. It's become so confusing to people. And it's even gotten worse as there's been more of a health halo on protein. But I would say that especially for an endurance athlete, we have years of research to explain why carbohydrates are important for fueling your activity. And so, I mean, how much exactly? I mean, maybe that's debatable because a lot of the older research, again, was on male athletes. And so have we done adequate studies to say this is the amount of carbohydrate based on your level of performance and activity and age and I mean, but I don't think it's that nuanced that we can't look towards the carbohydrate recommendations we have for endurance athletes. The other part of that would be carbohydrates are plants, like basically inherent to what they are as a food group or a macronutrient is those are plant foods. And so to categorize that these are foods you should avoid are totally contrary to everything we know about health outcomes. So then we have to kind of drill down into, okay, but carbohydrates are such a big, what are we really talking about? Are we talking about fruits and vegetables and grains and nuts and seeds and beans and, anything like that and soy? Are we talking about that? Or are we talking about donuts and biscuits or whatever? And I personally believe that they all can fit. But I think that what happens sometimes is that it's, well, I should avoid sugar. I should avoid sweet foods. Ice cream is bad. This fats, all of these like quote unquote, the food labeling. These are healthy and these are unhealthy. And so it's calling that out too, to say, well, first and foremost, like if you're avoiding carbohydrates as a whole, let's at least reclaim what you might consider safer carbohydrates. So, foods that have really important nutritional implications for your overall health. Getting that fiber intake in a meaningful way. Oatmeal, whole grains, whatever that might mean in terms of your food preferences and how it fits in. Then it's neutralizing it a little bit. Like, look, as we go into aging, do you really want to be an 80-year-old who doesn't let yourself have a donut or ice cream? I mean, that's kind of sad to me. I mean, you might not like those things, and that's totally okay. It's your own personal preference. But I think that at some point, you're going to have to learn how they fit in a really appropriate way, that these are fun foods. And I think like Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch in their book Intuitive Eating use this example when they talk about these fun foods as if like it was like vacation. Like, you go on vacation and boy, who doesn't want to just stay on vacation? But no, we have to come back to work. And so there's this like proper place for these foods. And so you can have your everyday foods and then you have these sometimes foods. And so again, we have to kind of look at that like a hierarchy. One, carbohydrates inherently are not bad. Two, they're actually essential, not only as an endurance athlete, but also for health. There are so many important vitamins and minerals and nutrients in carbohydrate type foods. And then it's coming to grips with the fear that something bad's going to happen if you have some pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving. Nothing bad's going to happen. You're going to be okay. That is not why you're gaining weight or not going to lose weight. But it might be a risky food because it's been forbidden for so long. And so then it feels scary because if you have one bite, you're just going to eat, out of control. Well, then that's where you need some support around that. So then we work with people to safely bring these foods back in so that you do still maintain that sense of control, not over control, but a sense of, okay, I can do this. I can feel good about this. I can manage how these foods are enjoyable and then nourish my body too.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And the one thing I would add too is that even if you are not an endurance athlete, you're listening to this and you're kind of on, like, remember we had defined active women, like maybe you're just the occasional Pelotoner going for a shorter run, like whatever you do, you still need carbohydrate, and an extremely low carbohydrate diet is also not appropriate for you because, as you just pointed out, a lot of these carb-rich foods have so many other key nutrients, and also you need to be fueling your body with carbohydrates for energy. So, and I guess the last other or a good takeaway might be as well is that there are a lot of books out there. There are a lot of protocols for women in their 40s and 50s and all of that. And women are picking these books up and following it to a T. And I think that can really lead to a lot of problems. You really need to assess, all nutrition should be really individualized, and you should really take a look and see what your individual needs are and understand that you can't just follow this prescription, this generalized prescription, and expect it to work wonders on you. Not that there's anything wrong with reading books and all of that, but we just have to be cautious.
Yeah,
I think is the messaging.
Well, that is actually how I got involved in the menopause space, was that I was just, this was a little over a decade ago, and I was trying to help women in this age group get some good nutrition recommendations related to their menopausal symptoms or changes in body weight. And again, I was working with all types of athletes and other women as well. And I would, grab a book that someone had recommended, and then they're like, you can't eat fruit, you can't eat this, you can't eat that. I'm like, why? Like, what's going to happen? And so that's this process of I want to know the mechanism. I want to know how that's helpful, because that does not make any sense to me. And so that's the other thing, is recognize some of these people have a book to sell, and some of it is their own belief, or that's what worked for them. And so it's kind of this recommendation of, this worked for me, so you should do it too. But that isn't necessarily what is going to be the best for you. And so it is, read that information with a think of, does that make sense? So I think you and I have probably both had to do this charge against the keto diet revolution thing. And the keto diet was a really great example of where people would say, will you help me with a keto diet? And I'm like, not necessarily, but tell me more. And they're like, well, it doesn't make sense. I feel like I should be able to eat fruit. And I really, really like yogurt. Yep, you can have those foods. And so it's kind of helping people recognize this was a problem, because yes, you had this goal of weight loss or whatever that might have been, but now you're not eating perfectly nutritious foods, and that in the long run is not going to be sustainable. That's why most of these research studies, if any research study is less than a year, you and I could do a research study and pull out a food group and people would lose weight and stay within it for 6 months to a year. Yeah. But when you look at 2 years or longer, most of these very restrictive eating protocols are not sustainable. And so when you read some of that stuff, the other question to ask yourself is, will I be able to do this forever and ever? Because no different than the drugs, once you go back or change your eating, or quote unquote, think you're eating a healthy way, the weight probably is going to come back on, if not more, because of the lean tissue that you lost and the fat overshoot that will happen with weight restriction.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing I like to have people do is really making that connection between when you are making a change to your nutrition, whatever it may be, maybe, whether you're working with a dietitian or you're doing things on your own, really observing how those things make you feel. If you decided to intermittent fast or remove carbohydrates, and obviously those are things that we recommend doing, but if you made any change to your diet, you decided to go vegetarian, whatever it is, what do you observe? How does that feel for you throughout the day? How does it feel in your workouts? How are you sleeping? What are health markers? Just kind of just really paying attention to various things that are happening. And or maybe, maybe you're trying to eat more consistently or adding more carbs in, or whatever the case may be, just really making that connection between changing your nutrition or behaviors and then what is the result. And maybe it's not in that moment. I work with a lot of athletes where we're adding some nutrition immediately before a workout or during, and they, maybe they're saying, I didn't actually notice having more energy or feeling different in the workout, but maybe it's later in the day we see a change. So just kind of connecting the dots and really being observant and making that assessment on yourself, I think is helpful.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, we could go on and on because that's a whole nother
I know.
thing. And
I know. We're going to end it now. I know. We're at 90 minutes. Well, thank you, Val, so much. Where can everyone find you online if they want to reach out and work with you?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, which is valschonberg.com, VALSCHON, and as in Nancy, BERG.com. And then also on Instagram is v.schonbergrd. Or on Facebook, I'm still under my business name, which is Enlighten You Nutrition.
Awesome. Thank you, Val. You're awesome. This was so much fun. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
That's our show for today. I hope you all enjoyed that one. And if you did, please make sure you hit follow or subscribe wherever you listen. Share it with a friend who could use this information. And if you have a minute, I would be so grateful if you could also rate and review my show. If you're able to support the show financially, I do have a Patreon page. I'd love to see you over there. Patreon members get some great perks, including free merch, huge discounts on my digital downloads, and much more. I also have some affiliate links that, you can just do your normal shopping. So at no cost to you, you can support the show. For instance, Scratch Labs, if you like their products, I personally love them. You can use the code EATFORENDURANCE20 and get 20% off if you are a new customer. If you love momentous stuff, you can also use the code EATFORENDURANCE15 and get 15% off your purchase. You can see all my discount codes and affiliate links over on the shop page on my website, eatforendurance.com. All right, thank you again so much for your support. Feel free to reach out if you ever want to, Claire at eatforendurance.com, with any feedback, questions, or topic requests. Thank you so much. See you all next time.